Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this fireside chat on a pertinent topic, unlocking new trends in workplace culture to mitigate all crises. I'm Pooja Bothra, Senior Content Lead and your host for this session. Both my speakers are eminent personalities who consistently collaborate and influence human resource leaders across industries. But before I introduce them, I will take a minute or two to outline the agenda of this session. We are conscious that phenomena are never eternal, but sometimes the change is so slow that they appear to have existed forever. However, sporadically an external force comes by that acts as a catalyst to change, resulting in a rapid revolution. For instance, the pandemic forced organizations to relook at their culture, inciting a change that was long due. In this fireside chat brought to you by ETHRWorld and Indeed, we shall discuss the defining components of culture, how to identify when there's a trouble, and look for big picture solutions. It indeed gives me a great pleasure to introduce the two speakers. Rohan Sylvester is a recruitment evangelist at Indeed. Rohan is an experienced content creator with over 12 years of experience across verticals. Combining his passion for content, data-driven insights, and recruitment technologies, he currently provides companies with actionable strategies to enhance their recruitment strategy. Welcome to this show, Rohan.
Thanks for having me, Pooja.
Along with Rohan, I'd like to welcome Dr. Adil Malia.
Hi, Pooja. How are you doing?
I'm good, Adil. I'm doing very well, and I'm so happy to have you in this show. Adil is a veteran HR leader with 40 years of corporate experience with trailblazing organizations such as GE, Coca-Cola, Godrej, and more. Today, he is the CEO of a consulting company called The Firm. Adil wears multiple hats. He's a thinker, writer, and artist of the first order. I see him as an innovative storyteller using multiple techniques to put forward his original and extensive thoughts, understanding, and experience to inspire and influence the community. Thank you, Adil and Rohan, for joining us. I'm happy to share that we have a live audience as well, who's also part of this show. They will be engaging with us through the chat tab, and I will be sharing their comments and questions with you.
Sure.
Adil, I'll go to you first. You started your career in 1980. Since then, the definition of organizational culture must have changed multiple times. It would be great if you share an overview on how culture has evolved over these years and what it really means today in the digital workplace.
So, Pooja, from a larger perspective, rather than getting into understanding the perspective of how it has changed over the period of last 30, 40 years, I was trying to put in a proper definition with an understanding as to what is culture about. So if you were to go and do a search on what is culture, there are clearly 70 to 80 differing definitions of what culture is all about. So it is very necessary that we acquiesce on a common definition of what culture is about, so that when we are talking about it, there is a certain reference. And then we are able to say what really forms the culture of an enterprise, because that's the first thing we need to understand. So culture is, according to me and my personal, I have tried to create my personal definition on the basis of my experience with what organizational and enterprise culture is all about. So it is the distinctive identification of an organization with reference to its character, personality, belief, values, and style. All right. So these 5 components create a distinctive identity for our organization. And that distinctive identity has to be reflecting reflecting the way the organization manages its life-giving processes on the breathing track of the organization. Now, there is a definition I'm giving you, because these are 5 things which will be prevailing in an organization. So we are talking about character, we are talking about personality, we are talking about belief systems, we are talking about values, and we are talking about the style of the organization. But all of that is about how does the organization manage its life-giving systems on the breathing track of an organization. Now, what are life-giving systems? Like, we all know that human beings have got 7 systems. We all operate with 7 systems, right? So we have the digestive system, the circulatory system, the excreta system, and all of those systems. So there are around 7 systems. In the same way, any organization, profit-making, non-profit-making, small, large, multinational, all organizations predominantly have 7 life-giving systems. And those 7 life-giving systems have to be operating on the breathing track of the organization. Now, why do you say breathing track? Because I'm coming back to the point you raised to me, that over a period of time it changes. The breathing track of an organization provides the various economic, social, and behavioral challenges, and the culture of the enterprise has to keep changing pace or keeping pace with the breathing realities of the organization. So it's not static. It is not one culture defined at a given point of time which can stand true forever and ever. So how does an organization with those 5 characteristics is able to run the 7 life-giving systems of the organization on the breathing track of the organization, on the breathing track of reality? And that is very, very important. Now, over a period of time, we can all come to Pooja, if I have 1 more minute to take your time, if you indulge me. I am aware that general definitions of culture, which most books and all academicians talk about, is drawn very heavily from anthropological concepts, which predominantly means that we are talking about limited elements, because most of the anthropological analogies that we draw on to define culture makes us believe that culture is at the very, very superficial level, because we are talking about literature, we are talking about some rituals, we are talking about some practices, we are talking about some language, some music, something like that. So we keep drawing on these anthropological analogies to try and see how it links to the organization. Nothing wrong with them, it's good, but it gives a very limited belief, because that makes the people believe that culture is at the crust level, at the surface level, versus the real culture of an organization is at its core. So to be able to go to the core of the organization, from where all of its behaviors, its characteristics, its personalities, its belief systems, its values, and its style emanate, you need to go into the core, versus most anthropological analogies try to keep it at the surface level. So that is the kind of the ethicist definition of culture, from where we can take it forward. Maybe at a later point of time, tell me which are those life-giving systems, and I'll explain to you what it is all about. But I don't want to hog most of the time.
Yes, we'll come back to you with that. And this is really an eye-opening definition of culture. It's really broad-based. It covers every aspect. And, you brought various components of culture. And my next point is that, research studies point that a diverse workforce is central to drive innovation and productivity in an organization. Today, businesses are becoming both digital and global. This also leads to cultural differences in the workplace. My question to you, Rohan, is how is that impacting the decisions potential employees make in selecting an employer in a hyper-selective, talent-driven marketplace? Given that Adil just told us that, culture is made up by individual values, belief systems, their faith, their habits, practices, and so on. So how do you align those to have a unified culture when there is a diverse group we are talking about?
Thanks for that question, Pooja. And I'm not a fan of that term, the unified culture. That implies a similarity and a very one way of thinking things, right? Now, when we think of cultural differences, there is of course a negative connotation to it, but there is a positive connotation, one of conflicting ideas or differences of opinions, which builds something much larger, right? It's rarely, organizations aren't built on just one idea, right? It's all about different opinions that people bring to it. Now, yes, when organizations have very differing cultures within that, we have to consider the fact that it's completely fine. And there is a recent trend and a recent idea that's coming out, which revolves around the whole concept of culture add rather than culture fit. Now, your question was, how do potential employees figure out if there are so many different cultural systems, how do potential employees figure out how to select? It comes down to the values, right? It comes down to the base values that drive the growth of this culture at some level. And when you as an employee are looking at organizations and saying, I'm looking at them and they have very differing ways to look at things and have very different ways of doing things, that's not what you should be looking at. As Dr. Adil was saying, there's a lot of surface stuff that we mistake for culture at times, but it really boils down to the values the organization is bringing together, right? And if we can find an alignment with that values, and if an organization can share a story that really highlights the values, you can potentially attract the talent that you want and have them add to your culture rather than fit into what is existing. This is something potentially I want to point out that we do at Indeed as well. It's something we're very proud of. We've been driving this initiative that we are looking for people to add to our culture, not to come and conform to what we have, right? But you have to understand a few things. Our values, we have 5 of them: job seeker first, pay for performance, innovation, data-driven, and inclusion and belonging. If these 5 values make sense to you, bring your culture, add it to us, and take it from there. So it's not as simple as finding a unified culture and promoting that. It's about promoting what is the basis of that culture, right? And it's difficult to promote a unified culture, especially since Dr. Adil was saying things change, they evolve. So do we constantly keep changing the culture we are promoting as it evolves within the organization? I don't think that's a great idea, potentially. So
I have a disagreement on a certain point, and can I share a thought with you?
Definitely, Dr.
Sure.
Whilst over a period of time, culture does change, the truth of the fact is that culture of an enterprise is about rigidity. All right? Culture predominantly rejects anything that is alien to the predominant group that is in power at a given point of time. So you need to understand the concept of power. You need to understand to what the concept of people who are in power subscribe to, the behaviors, the norm, the shared beliefs, etc., because that becomes the very basis for the membership to the elite group in the culture. Now, culture rejects, because if it is rigid, it rejects people who come with differing thoughts and alienates them to the point that it throws them out, which is why you will see that most new CEOs and most new C-level employees who join a company within 18 to 24 months tend to get disoriented with the organization and leave, because when they join, they believe the culture to be something totally different. But as they go on into the hands-on experience of the culture, they like it or they dislike it. But if they do not reflect the predominant behavior of the group in power of the culture, they get ejected. So the concept of culture is very close to power and rigidity, till the catastrophic events happen and there is a need to move the culture out. So between an ideal culture that you are talking about and the reality of organizational culture, there are 2 different gaps, and how to meet the gap is the role of a wise leader.
No, completely agree, Dr. Adil. And in fact, I know what I am espousing is probably a utopian view of it.
Correct.
But the fact that we have to acknowledge what you exactly said, that these power structures exist and these power structures reject ideas, is not good in the long term. And maybe they say half the battle is knowing you're fighting that battle. The knowledge is half the battle. So potentially people who are listening today, maybe this description of the power structure, description of what utopia can be, maybe might inspire them to go towards that. And when you're attracting talent, rather than displaying the power structures, maybe we can display the values. But I completely agree with what you're saying on that factor, of course.
This has established the premises that time to time, leaders need to really rethink culture, because you don't want it to become overly rigid and you end up losing some of the very good employees, innovative, and, people who come with fresh ideas. Sometimes, like Adil also mentioned, catastrophes lead to actually, getting this thing executed. Was pandemic one of those black swan events that force leaders to become more open to, rethinking culture? Nobody in India really thought that, you could work 5 days remote working, you could work from home. I think employers were very, very rigid about employees being present at work, marking your calendars, marking your daily come in and check out time. So Adil, some thoughts on this, that how pandemic has forced leaders to rethink culture. Are we ready for other events of similar catastrophe in future?
So we will talk about pandemic, because I think that's running uppermost in everyone's mind, and including your mind as an actor, as an anchor, because you're asking this question. But as I told you, there are certain events when the culture, if it is not an open culture, if it is not automatically inbuilt into the culture of an enterprise to be open, to be allowing a diatribe. Diatribe is an opposing idea coming in and challenging my paradigms. So if those ideas are not prevailing, then certain external events happening in an organization forces the organization to relook at its culture. What are some of these elements? Pandemic may be only one, but that's only a sub part of it. I'll tell you the 5 or 6 critical elements which force a closed culture to start thinking openly. Number one is sudden breakdown. You're working very well, everything is going down. Suddenly you find you're not able to sell your products. Suddenly you find an attrition happening in your organization. You do not really have an explainable reason why it is happening. Chances are that your culture is corroding, all right? You need to have the foresight to be able to see that. The second is catastrophes, calamities, and crises. Any kind of crisis or catastrophe automatically makes it necessary, because you will never be able to win the wars of tomorrow with weapons of yesterday. Therefore, the moment that idea comes in, the culture will have to be flexible, open to innovative, and allowing an inward movement of ideas rather than externally throwing its own ideas. The third is unplanned contingencies, or say leadership, sudden leadership change, a leader at the top who is, you see, in the word culture, very beautifully, which most people miss out, there is a word called cult. And cult is what the leader and his powerful team built around him drive it. But what if tomorrow, God forbid, that leader is either moving out of the system or naturally dies or something happens? Automatically, the prevailing culture has to move out. My experiences, I can tell you, I was with GE when Jack Welch used to be the big guy. And then I was at a kind of a cusp of a junction where the new leader had come in. Now, a strong leadership culture driven by Jack Welch, if you were in GE, and you can ask any other person who has been in GE at Crotonville or wherever at that point of time, there was a sudden shift, and you could palpably feel the change in culture happening between the top leader changing, what he subscribed to, what he believed, what was his style, and the organizational reflections of the new leader's style. And you can say, oh my God, has the organization changed, or only one leader out there has changed? But these are some of the reasons. Or say, for example, a new competitor comes into the market, or a new technology suddenly comes and destroys you. Those are the reasons when even closed cultures are forced to become open cultures. Pandemic is one event. Of course, if your culture is not adjustable, then you keep hearing stories of companies which are all online for 9 hours in a day, 10 hours in a day, 12 hours in a day. And people are complaining that you are invading our privacy, giving us calls at 10 in the night, 11 in the night, just because we are at home. Now, cultures which are closed, which want to start behaving exactly the way they were behaving in office, even in a work from home situation, will reflect these behaviors. Versus ethics, behavioral patterns, online etiquettes, companies which were observing them even in the real situations will observe those even in the work-life situations, because it is so much a part of the natural pattern, the natural rhythm of working for them. So that's exactly what happens.
I totally agree, Adil, with what you've spoken. Whether it's working in the premises or working remotely, the vibes will continue to exist, however they were in both the environments. Rohan, you consistently speak to HR leaders. And you also mentioned that, companies need to proliferate their story, their cultural story in the market. So just share some strategies as to, what kind of channels do recruiters use, hiring managers use to, amplify their brand story, their culture story, and how important it is for potential employees, and at what parts in the employee life cycle do they get to kind of reiterate their organizational core values from the first person to the last person in the employee chain.
Let me address the second part of the question. And what part in the life cycle do you reiterate core values? And I would say that's a very simple answer. You reiterate your core values at every stage. When you highlight it when you're trying to attract talent, you mention it to people who are going through your hiring process. You explain and indoctrinate, for lack of a better word, those new people who join your organization. And then you constantly reinforce this system over the life cycle of the person while they're working in the organization for various reasons, right? If we are going to operate on the basis of culture and values, and that's what we use. So we have to make sure that everyone is constantly reminded about it. And I don't mean some, dystopian view of every time you log in, you're asked to look at the core values or things like that, but some ways where you can interact with organizations. For first, let me explain the channels, right? When you're trying to attract talent, you have multiple channels, your social media handles, you have the ability to share authentic stories which your company is doing. Like, for example, many organizations share a so-called hashtag within their employee groups. And they say, if anything great is happening at your organization or is happening to you at the company, share this, tag us with this hashtag. And then the company typically picks that up and highlights it. So it gives insights into the organization, and you can use that as a way to attract. Another way is, of course, their career site, their employer branding channels like Glassdoor and like Indeed, where they can actually promote exactly what kind of values that they espouse. Many companies lead their employer branding with values because they figured out that we know the kind of people we want, and we want that to be the focus area. And of course, when you're onboarding someone during your training or onboarding process, you have to explain more. It's not just enough to give that value statement and move on in life, right? What does that value mean, right? What does that, how does that value translate into actions within the organization? For example, as I said, Indeed has a value system called Job Seeker First. And when we joined the organization, they explained to us what that essentially means is every action we do, we have to consider the fact that, is this beneficial to the job seeker? If it isn't, is this the action? Should we not be doing this? Should we be doing it? So we are able to translate the values directly into the actions that we want to do. And if you actually go through it, right, and then you have people who've been I've been working with Indeed for 4 years, but we still have webinars where people who I would like to call owners, who are champions of those values, right, come and talk to us. Like the data-driven value, the person behind our business intelligence will come and have a conversation around the data that we use. And then we have innovative engineers and the new products come and explain how the value led them to do an action which helped the company. So at every stage, we have just introduced the value, explained it, translated it to actions, and then given examples of how these values have like translated into work. So this is one of the things you have to do. And then it becomes this beautiful cycle, right? Then we promote all of these things that we use within the organization to promote the values to the external audience, and it's feeding each other, and we find the right people. So every time someone potentially comes across something about our organization and says, hey, that makes sense to me, I would love to be doing something, even if it's a single value to start with. So definitely come join us and then take that to the next level with us.
So Pooja, can I add on some thoughts?
Sure.
So a brand is the market broadcast of an enterprise culture. When you're broadcasting to the market, because culture is internal to an organization, but at some point of time, to create a brand impact in multiple different ways, you start announcing that internal culture, and that is what your brand is supposed to reflect. Now, the chances are that there is this schizophrenia that most organizations end up creating in an enterprise, because they use their brand statements in the market and the value propositions they offer to candidates at the time of recruitment are not actually reflecting the real culture of the enterprise, but have been created artificially to attract talent. And thus, when the people who believe that brand value proposition and join the organization on day 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the enterprise soon realize that I have been fooled, because the behavior in the organization is schizophrenic and absolutely contrarian to what was said as the brand value proposition when they were being hired. Now, naturally, this leads to, number one, initially disorientation. Number two, disbelief in the organization. Number three, disconnection from the organization. Number four, disengagement with the organizational processes. And number fifth, at the first available opportunity, seek an alternative to move away from that culture. I was telling you yesterday, Pooja, when we were talking, that if Fair and Lovely you buy in the market and that does not make you Fair and Lovely, you must be a fool to want to buy the second tube of Fair and Lovely, because you know it's a foolery. And that is why the most important thing enterprises need to follow is to ensure that the brand marketing statement in the market is closest to the real-time culture of their enterprise and is not some fanciful thing spoken out, which day one the employee in the organization says, shit, they have been lying to me.
Just to add to Dr. Adil, because he brought that up at the end, if you actually see some of the videos that we've created, employee branding, some of our roles are hard work. See, this whole concept of work-life balance is a personal preference, right? Some people want it, some people are okay. Some of our roles are hard work, and we literally say that, right? We literally tell people that if you join this department within our organization, you're going to have to work hard. And it's
but
fine.
In the other departments, it's not required. Only
no. This certain departments are definitely harder.
This is what I'm saying. The definitions have to be so realistic. Why do I say hard work? I'm expecting everyone to work hard, but why hard or not? Deliver to purpose. So the brand proposition is deliver to purpose.
No. What I meant is more along the lines that don't come here having this unrealistic expectation. No. Once you set that expectation, then it doesn't have to be the rosy picture. No organization is perfect. And you're right. We actually have a statistic that says 65% of people start looking for new jobs 6 months after joining a company. Correct. So within 6 months, the rose-tinted glasses have fallen off and they're already looking for new roles. So that definitely, I completely agree with you on that front.
And, the fact is that to hire one employee, it costs 2 years of that employee's salary. So I'm sure, organizations also would want to show a realistic picture when they're hiring employees. And today with Generation Z, making a grand entry in the workplace, and 75% of employees in 2025 onwards is going to be Generation Z, it is imperative that employers are more transparent and employees also have ways to find out, what really is what are they really walking into. So Rohan, what kind of tools, how do you empower candidates? What kind of future can we see in this respect? No, what I'm trying
I
to say is that how do candidates know what the real, organizational culture looks like even before they join? And the onus also lies within the employer, with the employer to give a realistic picture. So
Pooja,
how do we close that gap?
Pooja, clearly you have not been in the labor market for a long time now. Because anyone who's in the labor market has some 500 ways in which they can find out about the culture and the organization. Not like your old times when he has to be asking someone in the company to check out, is this company good or not?
I actually have a great story for this. 13 years back when I started my career as a content writer, my first job makes me sound really old, but that first content writer job, I actually found the ad in the newspaper. I knew nothing about that organization. I knew nothing about the role. I literally walked in for an interview after calling them and then started assessing them at that level. And yeah, as Dr. Adil said, we live in a world where everything that can be reviewed is being reviewed, right? I was recently on Amazon and I saw there were 1,000 reviews for toothpaste. So, we live in that world where everyone is sharing what they want to feel. And there is social media, there is employer branding channels like Indeed and Glassdoor, which are giving reviews. Now, it's not just that. You have organizations sharing their authentic story, or at least they're trying to. Of course, it's all taken with a pinch of salt because you obviously want to put your best foot forward in branding and when it comes to that. But the reviews kind of counterbalance that, where job seekers come and they sort of understand what the employees are saying. Now, of course, it's not a perfect picture, right? There are a lot of biases inherent in the system when you look at reviews, when you look at employer branding. And sometimes it's as simple as even identifying someone on a professional network and reaching out to them to try and figure out what it actually is like. But as Dr. Adil said, there are so many methodologies in place now to just find out what it's like to work. Reviews is one. And maybe reaching out to people within the organization is another as well.
But Rohan, I must compliment your company, Glassdoor.
Thank you.
Because there was one particular client, and I recall, who once told me, Adil, is there some way you can file a case on Glassdoor and stop it from publishing any of my company data? And I said, instead of doing that, actually invest your time, money, and energy to work on improving the culture of your organization rather than blocking them from giving that information.
Thank you, sir.
Great job.
Definitely. Thank you.
I'll just take an audience question at this point of time. The question is, culture is very subjective. Considering this, can you suggest a framework process to identify the right culture, value system for a particular industry or organization? So, since we were discussing this already, so I thought I'd just take this question.
And Rohan is the man.
No, I mean, this is obviously, as Dr. Adil will say, this is a consulting job by itself, helping an organization figure out what its value system is. Yes, culture is subjective. How can you figure out what value system? Firstly, if your organization doesn't have a value system, find out from your existing employees what they love about the company, what they love doing. What are the outcomes that they're seeking that they kind of identify with? That's a very good place to start. And then we have to kind of align that with what your strategic business plans are. Remember, the values is to build a culture, but the goal is always to, drive the business forward as well. So your values have to be reflective of your business culture, right? And then you'll start seeing that there are certain values or certain things that they love about the company that really stand out and really actually both people love and people which also drive the business forward. And then you're close to determining those value systems. You shortlist a few and then you put them forward to your organization and genuinely ask them, do you agree with this? Or do you not? And once that gets finalized, right, start telling them what this means, what this value means in terms of actions, and then start acting on it, right? And as a consequence, culture will potentially come from that, right? And it's not as simple as just telling people to behave in a certain way. When once you understand what they like and what moves the business forward, it typically comes in that ways. Dr. Adil, anything to add? I'm sure.
Can I remove the esoteric part of this mystical part about culture and bring it down to business? all right, because culture has to run the business, all right. So it's very esoteric to say it should be values, it should be this, it should be all those fanciful bowls of lovely fish in the water kind of thing. These 7, because we said culture has to be seen in terms of the life-giving processes on the breathing tracks of the organization. So what are these 7 life-giving organizational systems? Number 1, demand creation and demand fulfillment. Number 2, order to remittance cycle. Number 3, brand management and value propositions. Number 4, quick market intelligence and new product innovation. Like that, there are 7 operating systems in an organization because the organization has to create value directed towards its purpose. Now, so esoterics are good to explain, but at the hard level where the business is running, these are the life-giving systems. Now, how do you operate the character, personality, beliefs, values, and style on these 7 operating systems which are generating value for your organization? That is the real culture. So time we move away from these esoteric, fine-sounding, hi-fi, nebulous, let's have coffee and talk culture. No, no, no. Culture is a business proposition. Culture is how business happens. Culture is how value is created. And therefore, your style, your character, your personality, your belief systems, and your values create business profits. And that is why culture is very, very important. If culture erodes, successful organizations become failing organizations. Now, remember, I'm making this difference between successful organizations and winning organizations. Winning, you can win once in a while by virtue of anything. But successful organizations become failing organizations if there is a culture erosion. Therefore, be mindful if your culture is eroding, how do you track it over a period of time? And how do you ensure that you rebuild itself to ensure that you are again on the winning track?
Very valid points, Adil. And, you also mentioned purpose. And I believe organizational purpose is the cornerstone of culture. Essentially, a truly purpose-driven enterprise must have purpose as its guidepost for decision-making, including the opportunities it decides to pursue and not pursue, and demonstrate commitment to responsible business leadership.
Sure.
This is essentially very important for Generation Z also. So what trends are emerging in this respect? How mindful are today's leaders? Adil, over to you.
Oh, I think let's hear Rohan out because I'm, adding. I'll add to what he said.
No, definitely. Dr. Adil, please carry on. I think this is more in your wheelhouse than in mine. I'll be honest with you on that.
All right. So number 1 is there are 4 elements which will remain constant irrespective of what changes. And I keep saying this for want of anything else, for easy recollection, I use the anagram of my name: agility, drive, innovation, and learning. Any organization, irrespective of the changing external environment, if it wants to be a winning organization, if it wants to be a successful organization, it will have to do 4 things. It will have to be agile. It will have to drive passionately to the purpose. It will have to be innovative because situations are changing. And it will have to be a learning organization because only a learning organization builds capabilities. And unless you have capabilities, everything else is superficial. Therefore, ADIL, just for ease of reference, are these 4 qualities that your culture should absorb. Your culture needs to be filtered and soaked in agility, drive, innovation, and learning capabilities to be able to be a successful organization forever and ever, irrespective of the situation. And that's very important. Does
very
it make sense?
Interesting. Very interesting, Adil. Rohan, the next question is for you.
Pooja, Adil is interesting, but not my name, the ADIL, which I told you.
Yes, it is. It is. And it's easy to remember, now I'm never going to forget this 4 points. Rohan, the question for you is, companies are expected to keep a stand on social issues. Employees want their employers to speak out on matters of injustice and inequity. This includes committing to making workplace cultures more equal and inclusive. How do you see that unfolding in the hybrid workplace?
That's a very interesting question, Pooja, and a little loaded as well. So I'm just going to, as conscious consumers and as conscious job seekers and employees, we expect brands and companies to take a stand on social issues, right? And we have to understand that values at some level are a two-way street as well. When we are when we're trying to attract talent, you notice that job seekers today want to feel like they're part of an organization that's not just having a social impact, but are also taking a stand for certain things, particularly with the values that they want within themselves. Maybe it's a personal value as such. If you could think about it, even as we all worked remotely last year, employees were sharing social posts on the commendable support their employers extended to people in need, be it healthcare workers, hospitals, migrant workers, marginalized groups that were affected. Throughout it, organizations, during the pandemic, the organizations were supporting society at large, right? They were trying to do as much as they can. And employees were proud of that, and they kept sharing it on social media. We all saw it. And I think in this new world of work, there is a greater need for people to be socially relevant. I think, I know this is really cliche to say that the pandemic has made changes. We know that's happening, right? There's been a psyche shift in many things, but we need to start asking ourselves. A lot of organizations and a lot of employees started to ask, are we trying to create value, or are we trying to just create only profit, right? Because employees are asking this of organization as well. And all of these values are important to them. Diversity, inclusion, matters of social importance when it comes to diversity, right? People are reading it and people are believing in it. And we've noticed that more job seekers are actually reading things about organizations' diversity, even if they're not from historically marginalized groups, right? Historically marginalized groups, accessing diversity literature makes sense. But even people who are outside of that, people who have benefited from the status quo systems, are suddenly saying, yes, it makes sense that we need a more diverse world. So so there is a greater requirement that companies need to take a stand on some social status. Now, the risk appetite of organizations to take that, I think, is varied depending on the companies that we work with. Some companies know that it's a worthy enough stand to take. Some companies may not look at it in the same way, right? So it of course differs from organization. I think a very good example was what happened in America last year with the Black Lives Movement, right? We had organizations taking a stand there, which I had never seen in the past, but for some reason, it was a watershed moment and they needed to take a stand. There was a requirement there. Not only did it come from consumers, it came probably from within, with employees saying, we have to take some sort of a stand. So I think it will in the future, you'll start seeing more companies at least trying to take a stand on social matters, mainly because employees ask for it and job seekers want to know it's happening as well.
Adil, I'll also go to you with the same question, but I just want to, make one or two points. One is that, we are all aware that businesses are becoming more global. At the same time, the world is also becoming very polarized. People today have very radical views and the tolerance level is also going down. Amidst all this, how do you expect global businesses to kind of nurture a equal and an inclusive environment and kind of, stitch thought processes into one thread? It's hard. And secondly, also how to keep a social, stand on social issues, social political issues.
So culture, by definition, is the voice of the collective consciousness of the organization. All right. Now, what has changed over a period of time from the time, and going back to your first question to say, what have I seen changing over a period of time? What is the transitory movements which are happening, the milestones and the watershed movements that have helped to bring culture to the point it is? So culture is the the voice of the collective consciousness, which at a given point of time in the past was the voice of the power and the leadership that was prevailing in the organization. So the leader decided, I am an Indian enterprise. I don't want women on leadership roles. They can be there in the reception. They can be there in the junior management role. I don't like it that way. All right. So culture at a point of time represented the voice of the powerful leadership, which defined the predominant culture prevailing at a point of time. But now this collective consciousness has broken away from its leadership mold and has gone to a larger organization where the guy down the line in Amazon or Google or wherever in the world he is, he wants to have a voice that, well, I don't think that what you are saying is what I want. If there is a diversity issue, I am not willing to accept that you say that the culture of this company, that I am an equal investor. Today, your employee is saying that you may have invested equity. I have invested my career, and my career cannot be undervalued just because you are putting a monetizable value on the equity you have done it. My career, my efforts, my energies, my skills, which I can sell to any other company outside, if I'm investing those in your company, I need to have an equal share of voice in the collective consciousness. Therefore, if I believe in something, if I have a point of view on certain social stance, don't give me that political stance where you want to be very pally with the government and you keep saying that those on the social issues are your views. If I have a view and if the larger collective view is that, then that should be the view of the enterprise, and not only that, what the powerful leadership is saying. And that is how the stance on the social issues will become. Which is why you see POSH Act coming in place. You will see a lot many whistleblower acts coming into place, organizations forced to become listening to the whistleblowers and things like that. If leadership was allowed to have its say, it will never allow all that to happen. Because technically, when you are allowing power percolation down the line by redefining your collective consciousness, you are actually striking at the root of power. Because now I am no longer that powerful leader in the organization who can decide what I like. I have to now create a consensus, build a consensus, and make that a part of the collective culture rather than just sitting in my air-conditioned office and defining what the culture is about.
I feel today's social media has really empowered employees. So, they can put in an opinion on social media, and they are the brand ambassadors of that particular organization, and therefore they become custodians of the culture also. So, which did not exist in the past.
Therefore, companies are putting very restrictive policies for social media presence of their employees because they are worried that if they don't put, well, it will open out the internal things that they want controlled.
Exactly. So, Rohan, there's an audience question for you. How do we ensure that all new joinees are made aware about our culture in these times of digital hiring and virtual onboarding? I see a distinct disconnect and new hires feeling left out.
That's an interesting question. If there is a disconnect, right, the first question we need to be asked is, are we actually conveying the culture? Or are we talking about other things and hoping that they will elicit the answer by reading between the lines, so to speak? I think sharing, it's not about letting them know about the culture, right? Culture is not something that you can tell them about. It's something they'll have to experience. And I can only think the only way to bring that about is to talk to them about how the company works, and some of the examples of the culture in action perhaps is one way to share it, but I don't know if we can actually make them aware about the culture. For example, if it's about openness, I think you should have systems in place to kind of highlight that, rather than actually having like a training program that says, hey, guess what, this is our culture and this is how we should do it. I think people are too worried about the fact that people are not getting our culture. I think they should focus on giving them the tools to figure it out themselves rather than just sharing it thing, which I don't think will actually work. I feel from a learner's perspective, people tend to assimilate things better when they pick it up themselves rather than being forced upon them.
But I would seriously advise, and you're right, Rohan, what you said is so right, that actually the greater problem is that rather than the new joinees that you are talking about in the question, I have a real question mark on, does the top leadership of the organization understand the culture of the organization in the same way as everyone else believes? So go and ask the 10 top most powerful men in your organization to write down 7 characteristics of the culture of our organization, and then see if these top 10 guys who are the power brokers in the system, whether they agree that the 7 elements of culture that each one of them is talking, is there an alignment at all? Because generally we believe that there is one defined culture which everyone, and then there is a certain disarray around that culture. But the chances are that the culture of an enterprise is so nebulous that even the top 10 guys are not uniformly agreed on what is the culture of the organization. So don't take the culture as defined, well understood, and aesthetic.
Actually, Dr. Adil, when you made this point, it reminded me of this anecdote I heard from one of the leaders I was interacting with. And we were discussing about culture and values, and they mentioned this very same situation came up. And they wanted to actually know how many people know the values of the company. And they turned around and asked some very senior leaders, and several leaders were unable to actually articulate it. Or, funnily enough, they were able to articulate the values that they connected with and not articulate the values that they couldn't connect with. And then you suddenly have this
big thing. That it is their personal values and not the collective cultural values of the organization.
Exactly. So you're right. I wouldn't be too worried about this. To answer the attendee who asked the question, right? I wouldn't be too worried about people picking up on culture. Culture will happen. It will permeate through the organization. It has to, and it's human nature. I mean, I think Dr. Adil was saying anthropologically we go behind that, right? It's part of everything we do.
I agree. And Rohan, it's very true to human nature that you want to see what you want to see and you want to hear what you want to hear. So there, when you talked about that anecdote, I just thought about that. One more audience question. How is a digital engagement with both employees and customers impacting delivering culture and values in today's time? Adil, you want to go for it?
I thought all these kind of intelligent digital questions, Rohan is more qualified, but I'll make an attempt.
Please, Dr.
So, this is where we go wrong of mistaking the tools and the platforms to be the purpose. All right. So digital times are expecting organization cultures to reflect speed, agility, etc., etc. But the culture of the organization does not change because of that. The culture changes when it is in conflict with the expectation of the collective consciousness. So if the collective consciousness is not in a state of conflict, then digitization is not going to change that. But because digitization is coming in, the newer tools are coming in, the communication is going to become faster, the pressure creation through social media is going to be much more. It then facilitates the culture to keep changing to that requirement. But if your culture is reflecting those values, then digitization is not impacting. So don't mistake the tools and the platforms to be the purpose of culture.
Yes, Rohan, please go on.
No, I completely agree with what Dr. Adil was saying. I really don't have much to add to that. It's pretty straightforward in that sense.
Sure. There is a famous, saying by Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast. When he said that culture eats strategy for breakfast, Drucker pointed out the importance of human factor in any company. No matter how detailed and solid your strategy is, if the people executing it don't nurture the appropriate culture, your projects will fail. To that point, Adil, it'll be great for our viewers if you share certain points, as to what they should really look for when they are building their culture. At what point should they think about, rethinking their policies, practices? What would be some simple techniques you can leave behind for the audience?
So let me first of all add to Mr. Drucker's thoughts, because I have been talking and writing about this, culture eating strategy for breakfast. Culture not only eats strategy for breakfast, it marauds planning to pain, it tortures processes, and it totally assassinates opposing ideas of leaders who come with a different point of view. So culture is not only impacting strategy, culture totally marauds all kinds of planning which is not in sync with the cultural values. It totally tortures all processes which are not in favor of what the culture is reflecting. So if my boss had a culture in the organization, show me the face and I will tell you a policy. And then suddenly the new HR guy comes and says, now I will tell you what is the structured policy everyone will follow. You are taking away from the leader his power to decide the policy applicable depending on the face he likes or he does not like. Now, the moment the HR guy comes and puts such a process in place, culture, if it is very powerful, will reject that process and torture it to the point that it will become useless in the organization. All right. So it not only eats strategy, it marauds planning, it goes ahead and tortures processes, and it outrightly assassinates leaders who oppose the culture. So that is the strength of culture in an organization. Therefore, over a period of time, if businesses stop giving the results that they are giving, or if a new technology comes and creates a kind of a havoc in the market, or if the powerful leader dies, some of the things which I spoke a while ago on the same thing, then the chances of your culture corrosion is going to be very, very high. When you observe those numbers or you observe those things and phenomena happening of cultural erosion in your enterprise, high time that the Rip Van Winkle needs to wake up. Because unfortunately, we, the Rip Van Winkle in the organization, want to keep trying multiple things and keep forcing the same culture to be existing and prevailing. How many companies that you talk about? Now, this is a great opportunity of the pandemic that has happened. Pandemic is a fantastic opportunity, much bigger than the Second World War that I think in my analysis, and I've written about it. Now, the situation is how many of us, when the lockdown is removed, want to go exactly on the day when the pandemic lockout was declared and start believing that the world has only taken a hiatus and a holiday. Let's begin from where we began, all right? And let everything become normal. Reality is this is an opportunity. There is nothing called the new normal. There is no new normal because normal is never there in the newness. And that is what is important. It's going to be constantly changing. It is not going to be normal. It is not going to be a new normal, which is defined that new normal will tomorrow become an old normal. And that is the challenge that we have. To drive a culture which will be true and dynamic and flexible to be able to ever change and accommodate within itself all the challenges of the environment that will have to be managed to run its 7 processes on the breathing tracks of the organization.
That's a wonderful sum up, Adil. I'm sure the viewers would have really, taken these points and noted them down. And I really like the fact that you mentioned that the world is constantly changing. What we really need to stay away from is rigidity. So even if leaders are not rigid about their culture, and like Rohan mentioned, culture add is more important than culture fit.
But Pooja, rigidity is not bad. Don't make rigidity sound worst because your value systems you have to rigidly follow.
Yes, but there is a risk if the value system are not aligning to what it should, then I don't
value systems are aligned to the purpose. What are the behaviors which you will accept or not accept? If there was some wrong way you had to do to be able to survive, the organization doesn't have to accept that purely with an intention to accommodate that situation. So rigidity is not wrong. Flexibility at the right point and rigidity at the right point, it's a valid, justifiable, wise mix of the two, which is required.
Yes, I got that point. Thank you.
Just to add to
yes.
what Dr. Adil was saying, he's right. The values need to be, there needs to be some semblance of structure. It can't be fully thing. So when you have that rigid values or you have a very fixed purpose, then the culture can be what it needs to be to get to that purpose. So it completely agree with what Dr. Adil was saying. I just wanted to say that.
Yes. So, your purpose can create a solid framework and then values should be flexible.
No. Values have to be rigid. You can't keep changing your values. Value systems have to be value systems.
I think
Values should be rigid, and culture can be flexible.
Can change. Okay. And purpose should be the solid foundation. With that, we come to an end of this very interesting fireside chat on the pertinent topic. Viewers, I hope you found the session insightful. And thank you, Rohan, and thank you, Dr. Adil Malia, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting us, Pooja, and thanks, Rohan.
Thank you, Dr. Adil. Thank you, Pooja. Thanks for having us. And thank you to the audience as well. Take care.